All right, let's dive into a topic that's been creating a real buzz in the wellness world. We're talking intermittent fasting. You've probably heard about it. Maybe you're even curious about giving it a shot.
Yeah, it's definitely gained a lot of traction lately.
Right. So, to help us unpack all the hype and get to the heart of what IF is all about, we're turning to an article from Healthline. They've got a pretty solid reputation for health info.
Agreed, they're a good source for this kind of deep dive.
Okay, so before we get too far, let's just make sure we're all on the same page here. Can you give us a quick rundown of what exactly intermittent fasting is?
You got it. Intermittent fasting, or IIF for short, is basically all about, well, cycling between periods of eating and then voluntary fasting.
Okay, so not necessarily about changing what you eat, but more about when you eat.
Exactly. It's not like a typical diet where you're restricting certain foods. It's more about strategically timing your meals.
That makes sense. And I think it's important to clarify right off the bat that we're not talking about starving yourself.
Absolutely not. There are different approaches to IF, like the 5.2 method or the 16.8 method, and they can be adapted to fit different lifestyles. It's all about finding what works for you.
Okay, so now that we've got the basics down, let's get into the really fascinating part. What's actually going on inside our bodies when we fast? Why all the excitement about its potential benefits?
Right, well, this is where things get really interesting. Basically, fasting triggers a whole cascade of changes on a cellular level. One of the biggest changes is a drop in insulin levels. Insulin's a hormone that helps our cells absorb glucose, sugar, for energy. So when we eat, insulin levels go up, but when we fast, they drop.
And that drop in insulin is what leads to some of those much-touted benefits, right?
Yeah, like making stored fat more available for energy.
Ah, okay. So that's part of the connection to weight loss that we hear so much about. Our bodies basically start tapping into those fat reserves for fuel.
Precisely. But it's not the only thing happening. You see, fasting also leads to a surge in human growth hormone, or HGH.
HGH, the stuff athletes are sometimes accused of supplementing.
That's the one. But in this case, it's totally natural. And this hormone is known to, enhance fat burning and even promote muscle growth.
Okay, hold on. So we're talking about potentially burning fat and building muscle just by changing when we eat. Sign me up. But seriously, what else is going on in there? This is fascinating.
Well, there's this process called autophagy that gets activated during fasting. It's basically like our cells are doing a little spring cleaning.
Spring cleaning. Okay, I like that analogy.
Yeah, so our cells start breaking down and recycling old and damaged components, getting rid of the junk.
So it's like hitting the reset button on our cells. I mean, that's incredible.
It really is. And research suggests this process of autophagy is linked to a bunch of health benefits, possibly even playing a role in protecting against diseases and, get this, maybe even contributing to longevity. And there's even more. Fasting can even impact how our genes function, which could influence things like how long we live and how resistant we are to disease.
Whoa, wait a minute. You're saying that changing when I eat can actually affect my genes? That's powerful stuff.
It is. Intermittent fasting seems to work on so many levels, impacting our hormones, our cells, and even our very DNA.
Okay, so we've established that IF is way more than just a weight loss fad. It's like a total body tune-up. But let's talk about weight loss specifically. It's a big motivator for a lot of people, myself included. What's the research say about IF and shedding those extra pounds?
Well, the research is pretty encouraging. IMF can naturally lead to, well, a reduction in how many calories you take in without making you feel like you're depriving yourself.
Mm-hmm.
There's this 2022 study on the 5.2 method. That's where you eat normally for 5 days and then restrict calories on 2 non-consecutive days.
Right, I've heard of that one.
So in this study, participants ended up losing an average of 9% of their body weight in just 12 weeks.
9%. That's pretty impressive for just 12 weeks. So we're not talking about some tiny, insignificant change here.
Definitely not. But it's important to note that not all IF methods are created equal when it comes to weight loss. You mentioned the 16.8 method earlier, which involves fasting for 16 hours and having an 8-hour eating window. Well, a 2020 trial on that method, it showed some interesting results. It didn't actually lead to significantly more weight loss compared to just regular eating patterns. And what's more, there was even some loss of lean mass observed.
Oh, that's not good. Loss of lean mass, that means we're not just talking about fat, right?
Right, lean mass includes your muscles, bones, organs, and even water. And while some fluctuation is normal, losing too much can actually be bad for your health and metabolism.
Okay, so it's not just about the number on the scale, it's about what kind of weight we're losing.
You got it. And that's why it's so important to look beyond the headlines and understand the nuances of these different approaches.
Absolutely. And it's also a good reminder to always talk to your doctor before making any major changes to your diet or lifestyle.
Couldn't agree more. And speaking of nuances, the benefits of IF go way beyond just weight loss. It's actually showing a lot of promise for managing type 2 diabetes too.
Oh, really? I hadn't heard much about that. How does IF impact diabetes?
Well, one of the key things IF can do is significantly reduce insulin resistance. That's a major factor in type 2 diabetes.
Right, insulin resistance. That's when your body's cells don't respond to insulin as well as they should, so glucose builds up in your blood.
Exactly. And a 2022 review of 10 different studies found that intermittent fasting led to an average reduction in fasting blood sugar levels. That's a really important indicator of how well your body is regulating glucose.
So it's not just about managing symptoms, but potentially addressing one of the root causes of the disease. That's encouraging.
It is. And this is where things get even more interesting. Remember how we talked about differences between men and women earlier? Well, there's some evidence suggesting that those differences might extend to how people respond to IF for diabetes management as well.
Really? What kind of differences?
Well, there was this 2015 study, which was part of a larger meta-analysis published in 2017, and it found that while men saw improvements in blood sugar regulation with IS, women actually experienced a worsening of their blood sugar control.
Wow, that's a pretty significant difference. So maybe IAPT isn't equally beneficial for everyone. We definitely need more research on this, particularly on how it affects different groups of people.
I agree. It highlights how much we still have to learn about this complex topic. And it's a good reminder that, well, a personalized approach is always best. What works for one person might not work for another.
Absolutely. So we've talked about weight loss and diabetes, but what about the other potential benefits of IF? What else is going on inside our bodies that's got researchers so excited?
Well, remember that cellular cleanup crew we talked about? That autophagy process?
Yeah, the spring cleaning.
Right. So that, along with a reduction in oxidative stress, which is basically damage to our cells from things like pollution and just the normal processes of aging, and a decrease in inflammation, they all point to IF potentially having a pretty powerful protective effect against a whole range of diseases.
So it's like a systemic reboot benefiting our health on multiple levels.
Exactly. And this reboot seems to be particularly good for our hearts.
Okay. Heart health is definitely something we should all be paying attention to. Heart disease is, one of the leading causes of death worldwide. So what's the connection between IF and keeping our tickers ticking?
Well, IF seems to tackle a lot of the risk factors for heart disease. Like we've already talked about how it improves blood sugar and insulin sensitivity, but it also has positive effects on blood pressure, triglycerides, cholesterol levels, and even inflammation. All those things play a major role in heart health.
So like a multi-pronged approach to protecting our hearts.
Yeah, think of it as preventative care, rather than a cure.
Right. That's an important distinction. Now, I know there's been some buzz about IF and cancer. What's the latest on that front?
Yeah, that's still an area of pretty active research, but there are some interesting findings emerging. Studies in animals suggest that IF, or diets that mimic its effects, could help to prevent cancer. And some human studies are starting to back this up, especially when it comes to IF potentially reducing the side effects of chemotherapy. But we definitely need more research to confirm those connections.
So there's potential there, but it's important to be cautious and not overstate the findings, especially when dealing with a complex disease like cancer.
Absolutely. We have to be careful about jumping to conclusions.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've talked about the body, but what about the brain? Does IF have any impact up there?
Oh, it does. In fact, some research suggests that IF might actually be a brain booster.
Really? I'm intrigued. How so?
Well, all those benefits we talked about earlier, reducing oxidative stress, lowering inflammation, improving blood sugar and insulin regulation, those are all super important for brain health too.
So those systemic benefits are having a positive ripple effect on our brains.
Right. But there's also some evidence that IF might directly influence brain function as well. For instance, animal studies have shown that it can encourage the growth of new nerve cells. That process is called neurogenesis, and it could potentially enhance cognitive abilities.
Wait, new brain cells? That's amazing.
It gets pretty cool, right?
Okay.
And IF also boosts levels of something called BDNF.
BDNF.
Yeah, it stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Basically, it's a protein that plays a key role in things like mood, learning, and memory. And you know what? Low levels of BDNF are actually linked to things like depression and other brain-related issues. So by increasing BDNF, IF might help to protect against those conditions.
So it's not just about thinking more clearly, but also about improving our mental well-being.
Exactly. It's a holistic approach to brain health. And there's even some research suggesting that IF might protect against brain damage caused by stroke, although, again, we need more studies in humans to confirm that.
Wow. So far, we've covered weight loss, diabetes, heart health, cancer prevention, and brain benefits. Is there anything else? This is starting to sound almost too good to be true.
Well, there's one more area that tends to capture people's imaginations: longevity.
Okay, now that's a topic I think a lot of us are interested in. Could IF actually help us live longer?
Well, we need more research in humans to say for sure, but the findings from animal studies are definitely pretty fascinating. Rodent studies show that IF can actually extend lifespan, much like calorie restriction, which has been known to increase longevity for quite a while now.
So it's like getting the benefits of calorie restriction without actually having to constantly eat less food.
Exactly. A 2017 study found that mice who fasted every other day actually lived 13% longer. Another study, this one published in 2019, showed that daily fasting in male mice actually delayed the onset of age-related diseases like fatty liver disease. And get this, even fruit flies saw an increase in lifespan with IF.
That's remarkable. So while we can't definitively say that AF will make humans live longer, the possibility is certainly there, and it's a very exciting area of research.
Absolutely. It's definitely got a lot of anti-aging enthusiasts paying close attention. It's really amazing how much we're learning about the body's own ability to heal itself, especially with all this research on intermittent fasting.
It really is. Like, we have this incredible capacity for self-repair and rejuvenation built right in. And IF could be one of the keys to unlocking it. Speaking of rejuvenation, we were just starting to touch on the potential benefits of IF for Alzheimer's disease.
Right. And that's a really important area to explore, especially considering how devastating Alzheimer's is, and that, well, right now there's no cure. So anything that could potentially prevent it or at least slow down its progression is a big deal.
Absolutely. What's giving researchers hope in this area?
Well, a 2023 review suggested that IF might actually be able to delay the onset of Alzheimer's or even reduce its severity.
That's promising, but I'm guessing a lot of this is still based on early research.
Yet most of the evidence so far comes from studies in animals. But those studies are suggesting that IF could potentially protect against a whole range of neurodegenerative diseases, not just Alzheimer's, but also things like Parkinson's and Huntington's.
So there's a lot of potential there, but we definitely need more research in humans to really confirm these findings.
Exactly. But the initial results are really encouraging. It seems like giving our digestive systems a break might actually activate some protective mechanisms in our brains, helping them stay healthier as we age.
That's a fascinating idea. It makes you wonder if our modern lifestyles, with, constant snacking and eating around the clock, are actually doing our brains more harm than good in the long run.
It definitely raises some interesting questions, and it really points to the need for a more balanced approach to eating.
Well said. Now, before we get too carried away with all the potential upsides, I think it's important to acknowledge that IMF isn't necessarily for everyone, right? There are some potential downsides and risks that people need to be aware of.
Absolutely. Like any lifestyle change, it's really important to approach IF with a sense of caution and to, really listen to your body.
So what are some of the things people should be aware of before they give IF a try? What are some potential downsides?
Well, one of the most common side effects, especially when you're first starting out, is hunger. Your body is used to a certain eating pattern, so it takes time to adjust to periods of fasting.
Right, our bodies like routine.
Exactly. And some people also experience things like headaches, fatigue, or even difficulty concentrating, especially early on. These usually go away as your body gets used to it, but if they stick around, it's definitely a good idea to talk to your doctor.
That's good advice. Are there any groups of people who should avoid IF altogether?
Oh, definitely. Pregnant or breastfeeding women, people with a history of eating disorders, anyone with certain medical conditions like diabetes or kidney disease, those folks should definitely talk to their doctor before even considering any kind of fasting.
That's a really important reminder. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. What about medications? Does IF interact with any medications?
Yes, it can. That's another reason why talking to your doctor is so important. Fasting could potentially change how well certain medications work or even lead to some unwanted side effects.
Safety first, as always. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the practical side of things. If someone's interested in giving IF a try, where should they even begin?
That's a great question. The good news is there are actually a lot of different approaches to IF, so people can kind of choose one that fits their lifestyle and preferences.
That's really helpful to know. Can you walk us through some of the most popular methods? We've talked about the 5.2 method and the 16.8 method, but are there other options out there?
Yeah, absolutely. Another popular one is alternate day fasting, where you basically switch back and forth between days of eating normally and then days of either fasting completely or just drastically restricting calories.
That one sounds kind of intense. Is it safe?
Like any form of fasting, it's super important to do it safely and pay attention to how your body's feeling. It's not going to be right for everyone, and again, checking in with your doctor before trying it is a must.
Good point. So we've got 5.2, 16.8, and alternate day fasting. Are there any other approaches people might consider?
There's the Eat Stop Eat method, where you do a full 24-hour fast once or twice a week. And then there's the warrior diet, which involves eating small amounts of, raw fruits and vegetables during the day, and then having one large meal in the evening.
Wow, so many options. It's almost like a choose-your-own-adventure for fasting.
It kind of is,
Mm-hmm.
but it's important to remember that the best approach is ultimately going to be the one that you can actually stick with consistently and that works for your individual needs and goals.
That's key. Consistency is crucial for any kind of lifestyle change. Okay, let's talk about breaking the fast. Any tips for how to do that safely and healthily?
Oh, that's a good point. It's tempting to just go all out after a fast, but it's actually best to ease back into eating.
So what does that look like in practice? What should people focus on eating when they break their fast?
Start with something small, an easily digestible meal. Focus on nutrient-rich foods, things like fruits, veggies, lean protein, whole grains.
So nothing too heavy or processed right away.
Exactly. And hydration is key. Make sure you're drinking plenty of water throughout the day, especially when you break your fast.
Great advice. Hydration is so important, whether you're fasting or not. Now, I know there are a lot of myths and misconceptions floating around about IF. What are some of the most common ones you've come across?
Oh, one of the biggest ones is that IF will actually slow down your metabolism and make you gain weight.
Yeah, I've heard that one, but that's not actually true, is it?
Nope. In fact, short-term fasting can actually give your metabolism a boost. Remember all those hormonal changes we talked about earlier? Lower insulin and higher human growth hormone? Those actually promote fat burning.
So it's kind of the opposite of what people might think.
Exactly. Another myth is that you have to starve yourself during fasting periods.
Oh, that doesn't sound fun at all.
Yeah, and it's totally unnecessary. Most IF methods actually allow for some calorie intake during those fasting periods.
Yeah.
It's just, controlled. Like the 5.2 method, for example, it involves restricting calories to around 500, 600 on those fasting days, not completely eliminating food altogether.
Good to know. Any other myths you want to debunk while we're at it?
Oh, there's the idea that you can basically eat whatever you want during your eating windows.
The anything goes mentality.
Right. But that's definitely not how it works.
Yeah.
Intermittent fasting isn't a free pass to just load up on unhealthy foods.
Yeah.
The quality of your diet still matters a lot.
Right. It's about making healthy choices overall, not just about when you eat.
Absolutely. And then there's the myth that IF is only for weight loss.
Oh, we've definitely busted that one already. The potential benefits go way beyond just weight management.
Exactly. It's really a much more holistic approach with all sorts of potential benefits for both our physical and mental health.
Now, before we move on, I want to address something that I'm sure is on a lot of our listeners' minds.
What's that?
Social situations. How do you navigate those when you're doing IF? I mean, so many social events revolve around food, so it can be tough to stick to a fasting schedule.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The key is to plan ahead and communicate.
Communication is key in so many areas of life.
It really is. Let your friends know what you're doing, explain what IF is all about. Most people are really understanding and supportive.
And if they're not, well, maybe it's time to find some new friends. Just kidding. But seriously, it's important to surround yourself with people who support your health goals.
For sure. Remember, it's okay to be flexible. You don't have to be totally rigid with your fasting schedule. If you're going to a special event, it's perfectly fine to adjust your fasting window or even have a small healthy snack if you need to, just so you don't feel lightheaded or uncomfortable.
That's really reassuring to hear. It's about finding a balance that works for you, both physically and socially.
Exactly. And remember, it's not about deprivation. It's about making choices that make you feel good and that support your overall well-being.
Well said. Okay, as we wrap up part 2 of our deep dive here, I think it's important to acknowledge that IF is a pretty complex topic with a lot of nuances. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's always more to learn.
Oh, absolutely. Research on IF is constantly evolving. There are new discoveries happening all the time.
So what's the best way for our listeners to stay up to date on all the latest findings?
Stick with reputable sources like Healthline. Consult with qualified healthcare professionals. And, be critical of those really sensationalized headlines or any claims that just sound too good to be true.
Great advice. Informed decisions are empowered decisions. Speaking of empowerment, in the final part of our deep dive, we're going to shift our focus to the personal side of IF. We'll be talking to individuals who have incorporated IF into their lives and hearing about their experiences and insights. It's pretty amazing when you think about it, how much power we actually have to take control of our own health. And all this research on intermittent fasting really seems to underscore that.
It is empowering, isn't it? And it's inspiring to see how many people are embracing this practice and experiencing some really positive changes.
And it's not just about, like, the physical transformations, right?
Yeah.
It seems like IF can have a ripple effect on people's mental and emotional well-being, too.
Oh, absolutely. It's about cultivating this sense of awareness and mindfulness around food. It's about moving away from, those rigid diet rules and learning to tune into your body's signals.
We've talked a lot about the science behind IF and the different ways to approach it, but now I'm really curious to hear about those personal experiences. What are some common things that people share about their journey with intermittent fasting?
Well, a lot of people talk about that initial adjustment period,
Yeah.
getting used to a new eating pattern. Like we mentioned before, hunger pangs and cravings are pretty common, especially in the beginning.
Right. It takes time for our bodies to adapt.
But here's the thing. A lot of people find that those initial challenges actually start to fade as their bodies adjust. They start to feel more energized and even more focused during those fasting periods, and many experience greater mental clarity as well.
So it's almost like there's a mental shift that happens alongside the physical adaptation.
Exactly. And that mental shift can even extend beyond the fasting periods themselves. A lot of people report feeling more in control of their eating habits in general. They're making more conscious food choices, and they're less likely to, mindlessly snack or overeat.
So it's almost like they're developing a healthier relationship with food overall.
That's a great way to put it. And that newfound awareness can often lead to some pretty amazing positive changes in other areas of their lives too. Like people might start exercising more, they might sleep better, or they might just feel more confident and productive overall.
It's like this chain reaction of positive change.
It really can be.
Yeah.
And it's not just about individual benefits either. Intermittent fasting can actually have a really positive impact on social connections as well.
Oh, that's interesting. How so?
Well, a lot of people find that sharing their experiences with others, supporting each other through the challenges and celebrating those triumphs, it can create a real sense of community. People might join online groups, go to workshops, or even just swap tips and recipes with friends and family.
I love that. Having a support system is so important when you're making any kind of lifestyle change.
It makes a huge difference. And that sense of community can even ripple outward, beyond just the people who are practicing IF. It can spark conversations about health and wellness in general and encourage others to make positive changes in their own lives, whatever those changes might be.
So it becomes like this catalyst for broader positive change.
Exactly. And that's what's so exciting about exploring a topic like this.
Yeah.
It's not just about, acquiring knowledge. It's about empowering ourselves and each other to make informed choices that lead to healthier, happier lives.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, on that inspiring note, I think it's time for us to wrap up our deep dive into the world of intermittent fasting. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the science and the practicalities to those personal experiences, and the potential impact IF can have on everything from weight management to, well, maybe even longevity.
It's been a really fascinating journey, and I hope our listeners are walking away feeling, well, more knowledgeable about IF and maybe even a little bit inspired to explore whether it might be right for them.
Absolutely. Remember, this is just the starting point. There's a whole universe of information out there, and we encourage you to keep learning, keep exploring, consult with those qualified healthcare professionals, listen to your body's wisdom, and be patient with yourself.
And most importantly, enjoy the process of figuring out what works best for you.
Great advice.
Yeah.
A huge thank you to our expert for joining us on this deep dive, and to all our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, stay curious and keep those brains firing.